If you're someone who is very confident about this topic, do stick around till the end because I'm going to hit you with one question that trips up a lot of photographers. I know that your time is valuable, so I'm going to quickly tell you what is it that we're going to cover in today's episode. I'm going to be taking you through 3 techniques. The first one is back button focusing. We're going to see how to use it and why it is so much better. The second one is the Focus-Recompose Technique and why it is not as straightforward as it seems. And the third one is a very important mistake that we end up making, which once you know can become your biggest strength. Along the way, we'll cover some techniques and hacks that can be very useful in challenging conditions. And when I say techniques, I mean the exact steps that go into the process. I'm going to let you in on a small secret. Autofocus is the topic that I struggled with the most and the longest. In fact, for the first 2 years, I have lost countless photographs because I was using these techniques incorrectly. On that note, without further ado, let's begin. So, first and foremost, autofocus is important, but it is even more crucial in situations where your subject and scene is not waiting for you. Because here, every second that your autofocus is going to hunt for your subject is a moment that will never be captured and an opportunity that is lost forever. Which is why, when speaking of autofocus, it is not only important to focus on getting the correct focus, but also to get the correct focus fast. And this is exactly where these techniques come in. A lot of these techniques are going to be used in the autofocus continuous or the AI servo mode because that is the mode which we are going to use 100% of the times when there is movement in the scene. With that, we're going to begin with the first technique, and that is back button focusing. Now, every time you make a photograph, your camera performs 2 separate jobs. First, it locks focus, which means that it locks focus on a particular plane at a particular distance from the camera, and everything on that plane is going to be at its sharpest. And the second job is to actually take the photograph. Now, when you purchase a camera, the factory default setting is to assign both of these jobs to a single button, which is your shutter button. So the way it works is when you half press your shutter button, the camera is going to lock focus, and when you press it completely, that's when it takes the photograph. If you are shooting in the AF continuous mode, the camera will continuously track the subject throughout the burst. If you want to pause, you have to slowly ease out the button and pause it at exactly the half press state. Now, this is the biggest drawback of using a single button for focusing and for taking a photograph, because returning to that sweet spot of half pressed is actually practically inconvenient and it is tricky. So imagine you're tracking a bird in flight, and while pausing, if you accidentally lift off your finger from the shutter button or you ease out a little bit too much, the camera is going to stop tracking and you may actually lose a very important shot in that fast-paced situation. So back button focusing addresses that drawback by splitting the tasks between 2 different buttons. A rear button, which is only going to handle focusing, and your shutter button, which now has only one job, and that is to take your photograph. This is how the technique actually works on the field. Press the back button to start focusing. But how do you know that the camera has successfully locked focus? It will tell you and it will show you. There is a focus confirmation icon which is different for different camera bodies. It can be a dot, it can be a rectangle with a dot, and it is usually accompanied by a soft beep. So keep an eye out for that. So once your camera has successfully locked focus on the subject that you want, keep holding the button down continuously without lifting your finger to track the subject. And while doing this, press the shutter button whenever you want to take the photograph. Remember, if you are in the AFC mode and you want your camera to continuously track the subject, keep the back button pressed throughout that process. Do not release it. The moment you release your finger from the back button, the camera is going to stop focusing and tracking, and it is going to lock focus at the last point. This method gives you precise control of when to focus and when to shoot, and hence it is invaluable when it comes to fast paced or dynamic scenes like wildlife, sports, and sometimes even street photography. Now let's come to the second technique, which is the focus recompose technique. If you are enjoying the content of this video, do not forget to hit the like button, definitely leave your comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, as we learned in the last episode, not all autofocus points are created equal. Some are more efficient than the others, and they are concentrated more at the center of the frame. So if you place your subject at one of those central points, your camera is going to be able to lock focus faster and with more precision. Now, naturally, you don't want to be restricted to centered composition, which is where we recompose. And this is how we do it. First, you center the subject, which means you move the camera so that your subject sits on the central AF point. Next, you press the back button to focus. Focus is now locked at that distance. Third is you release the button, and this is a very important part of this technique. Fourth, you recompose without changing your distance to the subject. Shift the frame so that the subject sits wherever you want it to. It could be left, right, as per rule of thirds. And finally, make your photograph. Shoot by clicking the shutter button. Seems fairly straightforward, right? Yes, it's very effective technique, but there are 3 important points to watch out for. The first one is do not refocus. Once you have locked focus, release the back button and do not press it again. Do not refocus while you're recomposing, because if you do that, the camera may accidentally grab the background instead of your subject. If you have made similar mistakes, please do let me know in the comments below so I know that I'm not the only one who's gotten it wrong. The second point is to not change your distance from the subject. So when you're recomposing, do not move forward or backward, because that is going to change the distance of the camera from your subject, and it may throw your subject off focus, especially if you're shooting at wide apertures. So little bit of sideways movements is okay. And the third point is focus recompose technique is reliable only when your subject is not moving forward or backward. So when should we use this technique? Naturally, the first point is if your subject is not moving too much, and if it is only moving sideways, this is a technique that you can most certainly use. The second case, and one of the most important use cases of the focus recompose technique, is in low light situations. Because your central focus point is most sensitive to light, it has the most light gathering capability, which is why in low light, if your other autofocus points keep hunting for focus, your best bet is to place your subject at the center, get the focus. If you can recompose, good for you. If not, you will at least still have a photograph where your subject is in focus versus a photograph where the focus is missed or the photograph is blurry. There are 2 more situations where this technique works. First is if you're using slower lenses, which is typically lenses that have their widest aperture at f5.6 or smaller. This is especially true for DSLRs because, as you can see, when you shoot with slower lenses, the number of efficient sensors goes down and they are most likely concentrated in the central cluster. And finally, this is very, very useful when you're photographing using an entry-level camera body, because entry-level bodies typically have fewer AF points and only one cross-type sensor, which is your efficient sensor, and this one in all likelihood is located dead center of your camera body. So the focus recompose technique allows you to exploit that one efficient sensor while still composing the frame the way you want to. If you notice, while recomposing, we are not tracking the subject. We have taken our finger off the back button, which is why if your subject starts moving, it's once again going to lose focus. So what do you do when you have a subject that is moving? In such situations, you use autofocus points that are closer to that subject to lock focus. And finally, we come to technique number 3, which is making use of contrast when you're using autofocus. And let me demonstrate with the help of this example. As you can see, I have this box with some lettering, and I'm going to try and focus by placing my autofocus point at the white part of the box. Obviously, my camera is struggling to get me the focus. This is because regardless of whether you're using a mirrorless or you're using a DSLR, your camera needs a contrast edge. It needs to locate that change in brightness or colors along the edges to be able to lock focus. So it's our job to provide the camera with those edges. So if the area under your autofocus point is going to be smooth, if it's going to be evenly lit, your camera is going to struggle because it has nothing to measure. So the best chance of getting an accurate focus, getting a quick focus, is to place your autofocus point at a contrasty edge of your subject. So next time, instead of focusing on the skin, focus on the eye. Instead of focusing on the color of the jersey, focus on the letter of the jersey. Instead of focusing on a flat car door, focus on the window frame. And instead of focusing on the plain white part of this box, let's focus on the text written on it. And here you go. But what if your subject has, let's say, absolutely nothing that is contrasty and your camera is struggling to lock focus on your subject? This is where the basic funda of focusing comes into play, because remember, focus does not happen at a point, it happens on the entire plane, which is why look for other elements on that plane at that same distance as your subject, which have some contrasty aspects to them. Use them to lock focus. And once you've locked focus on the entire plane, everything on that plane, including your subject, are going to be sharply in focus. This is something which is a very useful hack when you are photographing in low contrast scenes and situations. So with that, we have reached the end of today's episode on autofocus techniques. These basic techniques, like I said, can be game changers, but they can also be game ruiners. And I hope you have found it useful. If you did, please do like, subscribe. If this video has cleared up some of the confusions, or if it has caused some new confusions, definitely let me know in the comments below. I look forward to reading them. And I haven't forgotten, here's a question which stumps many photographers, so give it a go. Autofocus depends on light, right? So does that mean that setting your aperture at its widest, let's say f2.8 or f4, is going to give you better autofocus performance? The answer to this question is in the pinned comments below, but definitely attempt it before you go and read that. I will see you next week, where we learn some more techniques to get the correct focus fast. Until then, take care. Bye.